The quiet hours. 1. Mara always woke before her alarm, not because she was disciplined, but because her mind insisted on beginning the day early. It was as if her thoughts needed a head start, lining themselves up before the world could interfere. She lay still in the half-dark, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the distant hiss of a bus braking at the corner, the faint creak of the building settling into morning. She liked these quiet hours. They were the only part of the day when her mind felt like a room she could walk around in without bumping into anything. Most people assumed she was calm because she moved slowly, spoke gently, and rarely interrupted. But inside, her thoughts were arranged like a crowded bulletin board, notes pinned over other notes, ideas layered on top of worries, memories tucked behind tasks. She had learned to navigate it, but it was never empty. This morning, one thought sat in the center: the new client. She had read his intake form 3 times the night before. 42. Works in logistics. Recently divorced. Trouble sleeping. Trouble concentrating. Trouble trusting his own judgment. The form was clinical, but the handwriting in the margins, uneven, rushed, almost apologetic, told her more than the boxes he checked. People always revealed themselves in the margins. 2. Her office was on the 3rd floor of an old building that used to be a dentist's practice. The hall still smelled faintly of antiseptic, though she had tried to mask it with eucalyptus diffusers and soft lighting. She kept the windows cracked even in winter. She believed people spoke more honestly when the air felt fresh. At 9 sharp, the new client arrived. He hesitated at the door, not because he was unsure he was in the right place, but because he was unsure he belonged anywhere. She recognized the posture instantly, the slight forward lean, the shoulders pulled in, the eyes scanning the room as if checking for exits. "Evan?" she asked. He nodded, relieved she had said his name first. They sat. He didn't speak right away. Most people didn't. Silence was its own kind of confession. When he finally began, his voice was steady but thin, like a thread pulled too tight. "I don't know what's wrong with me," he said. "I keep making decisions that don't feel like mine." She didn't write anything down. Not yet. People watched the pen more than they realized. "What does that feel like?" she asked. He exhaled, long and slow. "Like I'm living a few inches to the left of my life." She nodded. She had heard variations of that sentence many times, but each person meant something different by it. For some, it was anxiety. For others, grief. For others still, the slow erosion of self that happens when you spend too long trying to be someone else's idea of stable. 3. Over the next weeks, Evan returned every Tuesday at 9. He always arrived early but waited in the hallway until the exact minute. He never crossed boundaries, but he hovered near them, as if testing whether they were real. He talked about his marriage, which had ended quietly, without a dramatic fight or betrayal. "We just stopped being people who reached for each other," he said. "I didn't notice it happening until it was already done." He talked about work, where he felt competent but invisible. "I'm the guy who fixes things no one sees break." He talked about childhood, though only in fragments. "My father was present, but not really there." Mara listened. She watched the way he rubbed his thumb against his palm when he was uncertain. She noticed how he apologized before expressing any emotion stronger than mild frustration. She noticed how he described himself as if he were a character in someone else's story. People often revealed their deepest truths not in what they said, but in how they said it. For one afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the window, Evan paused mid-sentence. His eyes drifted to the bookshelf behind her, scanning the spines as if searching for something familiar. "Do you ever feel," he asked slowly, "like your life is made of habits you didn't choose?" She considered the question. "Not clinically. Humanly. Everyone builds routines to feel safe," she said. "But sometimes the routines start making choices for us." He nodded, absorbing the idea like someone hearing their native language after years abroad. "So how do you change that?" he asked. "You start by noticing," she said. Noticing is the first form of agency. He sat back, letting the words settle. For the first time since she'd met him, his shoulders lowered, just slightly, as if he had been carrying a weight he hadn't realized was optional. 5. As the weeks passed, something subtle shifted. Evan began to speak in first person more often. He stopped apologizing for having feelings. He started describing desires instead of only describing fears. But change is rarely linear. One morning, he arrived looking hollow, as if sleep had slipped through his fingers. "I had a dream," he said. "I was standing in my childhood kitchen. Everything was the same except the windows were bricked over. No light. No way to see out." "What did you feel?" she asked. "Trapped," he said. "But also, responsible. Like I had done it myself." Dreams weren't always symbolic, but they were always honest. She leaned forward. "Maybe the dream isn't about being trapped. Maybe it's about realizing you're the one who can remove the bricks." He looked at her, startled, not by the idea, but by the possibility that it might be true. 6. The real turning point came on a Tuesday in late spring. He walked in with a different posture, upright, grounded, as if he had finally stepped into the center of his own life. "I made a decision," he said. She waited. "I'm applying for a new position. Something I actually want. Something that scares me." She smiled. "Not professionally. Genuinely." "What changed?" she asked. He thought for a long moment. "I realized I've been waiting for permission to be myself. And now," he exhaled, steady and sure. "Now I'm giving it to myself." 7. After he left, the room felt unusually still. Mara sat quietly, letting the moment settle. She knew progress was fragile. She knew people could move forward and backward in the same week. But she also knew something fundamental had shifted. People didn't transform all at once. They changed in increments, small choices, small realizations, small acts of courage that accumulated until one day they looked in the mirror and saw someone slightly more whole. She closed her notebook, though she hadn't written much. Some stories didn't need to be captured on paper. They lived in the quiet hours, in the space between what people feared and what they hoped for. And in that space, she thought, people often found themselves again. 8. Spring settled into the city slowly, as if unsure it was welcome. The mornings were still cool, but the light had changed. Brighter, more direct, the kind that revealed dust on windowsills and the faint outlines of old picture frames long since removed. Mara noticed the change in her clients too. People often became more restless in spring. The season carried an unspoken expectation of renewal, and not everyone felt ready for it. Evan arrived that Tuesday with a quiet energy she hadn't seen before. Not excitement, something steadier, like a person who had finally stopped bracing for impact. "I heard back," he said as he sat down. "I got an interview." She watched the way he said it, not triumphant, not anxious, but grounded. A person beginning to trust his own momentum. "How do you feel?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "Capable," he said. "Which is strange. I'm not used to that." People often underestimated how foreign self-belief could feel when it arrived after years of self-doubt. 9. Later in the session, he mentioned something almost in passing. "I told my sister about the interview," he said. "She said she's proud of me." Mara noticed the way he looked down when he said it, as if the compliment were too bright to look at directly. "How did that feel?" she asked. He hesitated. "Uncomfortable," he admitted. "But also, good. I'm not sure I know how to accept that kind of thing." Affection, she thought, was a language some people never learned fluently. They understood it, but only in translation. "Maybe you're learning," she said. He nodded, almost shyly. "Maybe." 10. That evening, after her last client left, Mara stayed in her office longer than usual. She sat in the quiet, listening to the faint hum of the building's old heating system. She thought about the people who passed through her door, how each carried a private world inside them, full of contradictions and half-formed truths. She thought about Evan in particular. His progress wasn't dramatic, but it was real. He was beginning to inhabit his own life again, step by step. But she also knew something else. When people began to grow, the world around them often resisted. Change disrupted familiar patterns, and not everyone welcomed disruption. She wondered what resistance Evan might face next. 11. The following week, he arrived with a different expression, tight around the eyes, jaw set, shoulders slightly raised. Not crisis, but tension. "How did the interview go?" she asked gently. He exhaled. "It went well. Better than I expected." She waited. There was something else. "My ex-wife called," he said. She heard about the interview from a mutual friend. Mara watched his posture shift, shoulders pulling inward, hands clasping together. "What did she say?" she asked. "She said she's glad I'm finally doing something with my life." He laughed once, but it wasn't amusement. It was the sound people made when they weren't sure whether to be angry or ashamed. "How did that land for you?" she asked. He rubbed his thumb against his palm. "Like she was rewriting the past," he said. "As if I'd been stagnant, or lazy, or something." "And were you?" she asked, not accusingly, but curiously. He shook his head. "No. I was overwhelmed. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart." People often misinterpreted survival as stagnation. 12. As the session continued, something shifted. Evan's voice grew steadier, his sentences clearer. He wasn't defending himself, he was understanding himself. "I think," he said slowly, "I spent a long time trying to be the version of me she needed. And I didn't notice how far I drifted from the version I needed." Mara felt a quiet recognition. Many people lived that way, shaped by expectations they never consciously agreed to. "What version of yourself are you moving toward now?" she asked. He looked out the window, watching a bird land on the fire escape. "Someone who chooses," he said. "Not someone who reacts." 13. After he left, Mara wrote a single sentence in her notes. "He is beginning to author his own life." She closed the notebook and sat back. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be smooth. Growth rarely was. But she also knew that once a person began to see themselves clearly, it became harder to return to the old, blurred version. Clarity, once found, demanded to be lived. 14. 2 weeks later, Evan arrived with a quiet smile. "I got the job," he said. She felt a warmth rise in her chest. Not pride, exactly, but something adjacent. The satisfaction of witnessing someone reclaim their agency. "That's wonderful," she said. "How are you feeling about it?" He paused, searching for the right words. "Like I'm stepping into a room I didn't know I was allowed to enter." She nodded. "And now that you're in it?" He smiled again, this time with a hint of confidence. "I think I want to see what else is in here." 15. Outside, the city was shifting toward summer. The days were longer, the evenings warmer, the air filled with the faint scent of jasmine from the courtyard below. Mara stood by the window after he left, watching the light fade. She thought about how people changed, not in sudden leaps, but in quiet increments. A decision here. A realization there. A moment of courage that built on the last. She thought about how healing often looked like nothing from the outside. Just a person walking into a room, sitting in a chair, speaking truths they had never spoken aloud. But inside, entire landscapes were rearranging. And she wondered, as she often did, what new terrain Evan would discover next. 16. The edges of change. Summer arrived with a kind of brightness that made everything look sharper. Even the shadows seemed more defined. Mara noticed it on her walk to the office. The way people squinted against the light. The way conversations carried farther in the warm air. the way the city felt slightly more awake. Evan arrived that morning with a new kind of restlessness. Not anxious, but alert, as if he were listening for something inside himself. "I started the new job," he said. "It's different." Different could mean many things. She waited. "I'm not invisible there," he said. "People ask for my opinion. They actually listen." He said it with a mixture of pride and disbelief, as if he were still testing the reality of it. "How does that feel?" she asked. He paused. "Like I'm stepping into a version of myself I didn't know I was allowed to be." People often discovered their potential only after someone else made space for it. 17. The return of old patterns. Progress rarely moved in a straight line. 2 weeks later, he arrived quieter, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes unfocused. "My ex-wife reached out again," he said. "She wants to meet." Mara watched the way he folded his hands together, an old gesture, one he hadn't used in months. "What do you want?" she asked. He blinked, surprised by the question. "I don't know." Old relationships had gravity. Even when they ended, they pulled at the edges of a person's identity. "She said she's happy for me," he continued. "But it felt like she was talking to someone she used to know, not who I am now." "That can happen," Mara said. "People often hold onto the version of you that made sense to them." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to go backward." "You don't have to," she said. "But you may need to decide what forward looks like." 18. Mara's own quiet hours. That evening, Mara stayed late again. The building was silent, except for the soft hum of the exit sign and the occasional groan of old pipes settling. She thought about Evan's progress, but also about the subtle tension she felt in herself. She had always been good at observing others, but she rarely turned that same clarity inward. She wondered when she had last asked herself what she wanted, not professionally, not intellectually, but personally. Her own life had become a series of routines: morning tea, sessions, notes, quiet dinners, early nights. Predictable, safe, but also narrow. She stood by the window, watching the last light fade. The quiet hours were supposed to be grounding, but lately they felt like a room she had outgrown. 19. A shift in the room. The next session, Evan walked in with a steadiness she hadn't seen before. Not confidence exactly. Something deeper, like alignment. "I met with her," he said. Mara felt a small tightening in her chest. She waited. It was fine, strange, familiar. "But I realized something." He leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a secret with himself. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. Not to her. Not to myself. I was just there." That was new. That was important. "What did you notice about yourself?" she asked. He thought for a long moment. "I didn't shrink," he said. "I didn't disappear. I stayed present." Presence was one of the hardest skills to learn. 20. The unsaid things. As the session neared its end, Evan hesitated. His gaze drifted to the bookshelf again, then to the window, then back to her. "There's something else," he said. "Something I'm not sure how to talk about." She waited. Silence often opened doors. "I think I'm starting to want things," he said quietly. "Not just stability. Not just peace. Actual things. A life that feels like mine." Desire, she knew, was a sign of healing. People in survival mode didn't desire, they managed. "What kind of things?" she asked. He smiled, small but real. "I don't know yet. But I'm not afraid to find out." 21. A parallel awakening. After he left, Mara sat in the stillness of the room. She realized something subtle had shifted, not just in him, but in her. His growth had stirred something in her own quiet hours. A recognition. A question. If he was beginning to want more from his life, what was she avoiding wanting in hers? She closed her notebook, though she hadn't written anything. Some realizations didn't need ink. They needed time. Outside, the city hummed with evening energy. Cars passing, voices drifting up from the street, the faint scent of jasmine carried on the warm air. For the first time in a long while, Mara felt the edges of her own life expanding. 22. The weight of stillness. The heat of midsummer softened the city's edges. Even the mornings felt slow, as if the air itself were reluctant to move. Mara arrived early, unlocking her office while the hallway was still dim. She liked the building before anyone else arrived. The silence felt clean, unclaimed. She sat in her chair without turning on the lamp. The room looked different in the half-light, less like a workspace, more like a place where truths waited patiently to be spoken. She realized she had been avoiding her own quiet hours. She filled her evenings with small tasks, organizing drawers, wiping down counters, reading half a chapter before falling asleep. None of it was unpleasant, but none of it was alive. She wondered when she had last felt something that surprised her. 23. Evan's new edges. When Evan arrived, he carried a different kind of energy, contained, but charged. He sat down and rested his hands on his knees, palms open, as if ready for something. "I've been noticing things," he said. "Small things." She nodded for him to continue. "At work, I speak up without rehearsing what I'm going to say. I don't wait for someone else to confirm my thoughts. I just say them." He paused, searching for the right words. "And I don't feel guilty afterward." Guilt was a familiar companion for him, quiet, persistent, shaping his choices without announcing itself. Letting go of it was like stepping into a room with better lighting. "What do you think changed?" she asked. He looked thoughtful. "I think I stopped assuming I was wrong." That was a profound shift, the kind that didn't happen suddenly but accumulated over weeks of small, steady realizations. 24. The mirror effect. After he left, Mara found herself replaying his words. "I stopped assuming I was wrong." She wondered how many decisions in her own life had been shaped by quiet, unexamined assumptions. She had built a life that was stable, predictable, and deeply solitary. She told herself she preferred it that way. And in many ways, she did. But she also felt the faint outline of something missing, something she had never named. She stood by the window, watching the late morning light spill across the street. She felt a strange sensation, like the beginning of a question forming inside her. 25. A disruption in rhythm. The next week, Evan arrived late for the first time. Only by a few minutes, but enough that his breath was slightly uneven and his thoughts seemed scattered. "Traffic?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No. I ran into someone." He didn't elaborate. She waited. "It was a coworker," he said. "She asked if I wanted to get coffee after work." Mara watched the way he said it, carefully, as if testing the weight of the words. "And what did you say?" she asked. "I said yes," he replied. "And then I panicked." He rubbed his palms together, a gesture she hadn't seen in months. "I'm not used to being noticed," he said. "Not in that way." Attraction, she knew, wasn't just about desire. It was about identity. Being seen could feel like a risk. "What part of it felt overwhelming?" she asked. He thought for a long moment. "I didn't know how to show up as the person I'm becoming. I only know how to show up as who I used to be." That was the heart of it. Growth created a gap between the old self and the emerging one, and people often felt suspended in that space. 26. The therapist's threshold. That evening, Mara walked home instead of taking the bus. The air was warm, the sky streaked with the soft colors of early dusk. She felt restless, but not in a way that troubled her. More like a door inside her had cracked open. She thought about Evan's uncertainty, how he was learning to inhabit a new version of himself. She realized she was standing at a similar threshold, though she had no name for what she was moving toward. She passed a cafe she had walked by 100 times but never entered. Tonight, she paused. The lights inside were soft, the kind that made conversations feel intimate. She felt a small tug of curiosity. She didn't go in. But she didn't walk away immediately either. Sometimes change began with simply stopping long enough to feel the possibility of it. 27. A new kind of quiet. The next session, Evan seemed calmer. He sat with a relaxed posture, one ankle resting over the opposite knee. "I got coffee with her," he said. Mara felt a quiet warmth rise in her chest. Not because of the romance, but because of the courage it took. "How did it go?" she asked. He smiled, small but genuine. "It felt normal, not forced. I didn't perform. I didn't shrink. I just talked." He paused, then added, "I didn't realize how much of my life I spent trying to be acceptable." Mara nodded. "And now?" He exhaled. "Now I want to be authentic, even if it's messy." Authenticity was rarely tidy. But it was real. 28. The expanding hours. After he left, Mara sat in the quiet again. But this time, the quiet felt different, less like a room she was trapped in, more like a space she could grow into. She realized she had been living inside routines that kept her safe but small. She had built a life that required very little risk, and therefore offered very little surprise. She thought again of the cafe. The warm lights. The hum of conversation. The possibility of stepping into a space she had always walked past. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faint stirrings of desire, not for a person, but for a life with more texture. She didn't know what that life looked like yet. But she knew she was ready to start imagining it. 29. The shape of a new self. Evan arrived with a calm that felt earned rather than accidental. He sat down without the small, habitual adjustments he used to make, straightening his shirt, smoothing his hair, checking the clock. His body seemed to occupy the chair fully, as if he had finally stopped trying to disappear. "I've been sleeping better," he said. "Not every night, but enough that I notice." Sleep was often the first thing to return when a person began to trust their own life again. "What feels different?" Mara asked. He thought for a moment. "I don't replay conversations as much. I don't rehearse what I'm going to say the next day. My mind feels quieter." Quiet didn't mean empty. It meant spacious. "And how does that feel?" she asked. He smiled. "Like I'm finally living inside my own head instead of renting space in someone else's." 30. The therapist's unsettling calm. After he left, Mara sat in the stillness of the room. She felt a faint ache in her chest, not sadness, not longing, but something adjacent to both. A recognition. She had spent years helping people step into their lives, yet she had never fully stepped into her own. Her days were structured, her evenings predictable, her emotions carefully folded and stored like linens. But lately, something inside her had begun to stir. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just enough to disrupt the familiar rhythm of her quiet hours. She wondered what she would find if she allowed herself to want something more. 31. A small, significant shift. The next week, Evan arrived with a different kind of energy, lighter, but also more grounded. "I went out with her again," he said. "We walked by the water after work." Mara noticed the way he said it, not boastful, not hesitant, but present. "What was that like?" she asked. He looked down, almost shy. "Comfortable. I didn't feel like I had to be impressive. I just was." He paused, then added, "I didn't know being myself could feel that easy." Ease was a sign of alignment. People often mistook it for luck. "What did you learn about yourself?" she asked. "That I'm allowed to take up space," he said. "And that someone might actually want me to." 32. The unspoken parallel. That evening, Mara walked home slowly, letting the warm air settle around her. She passed the cafe again, the one she had paused in front of weeks earlier. This time, she stepped inside. The room was softly lit, filled with the low murmur of conversations. She ordered tea and sat by the window. She didn't read. She didn't check her phone. She simply sat, letting the unfamiliar sensation of being out in the world settle into her. She realized she had been living in observation mode for years, watching life, analyzing it, guiding others through it, without fully participating herself. Tonight felt like a small act of rebellion. 33. A new kind of honesty. The next session, Evan hesitated before speaking. His hands rested loosely in his lap, but his eyes held a quiet intensity. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Something I've avoided for a long time." Mara waited. "I'm realizing I wasn't just unhappy in my marriage. I was absent. I didn't know how to show up. I didn't know how to be seen." He exhaled, long and steady. "I'm not blaming myself. I'm just understanding myself." Understanding was not the same as excusing. It was the beginning of accountability. "What does showing up look like now?" she asked. He thought for a long moment. "Being honest," he said. "Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when I'm afraid." 34. The therapist's reflection. After he left, Mara found herself staring at the empty chair across from her. She felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. Pride in his growth, vulnerability in what it stirred in her. She had built her life around listening, around holding space, around being steady. But she was beginning to feel the edges of her own desires pressing against the walls she had built. She wondered what honesty would look like in her own life. What she might admit if she allowed herself the same courage she encouraged in others. The quiet hours no longer felt like a refuge. They felt like a question. 35. The threshold of something new. The next week, Evan arrived with a softness in his expression. "I told her about the divorce," he said. "Not the facts. The feelings." Mara nodded. "How did that feel?" "Like I was letting someone see the real version of me," he said. "Not the edited one." He paused, then added, "I didn't realize how much I wanted that." Connection, she knew, wasn't built on perfection. It was built on truth. "And how did she respond?" she asked. He smiled. She didn't flinch. 36. The quiet hours shift. That night, Mara didn't go straight home. She walked to the water, letting the breeze move through her hair. She felt something loosening inside her, something she had kept tightly held for years. She realized the quiet hours were no longer a place to retreat. They were becoming a place to begin. She didn't know what she was beginning, but she knew she was ready to find out.